everyone, my name is Faina and welcome to my channel. I have now made a playlist called English CIE GCSE Preparation, which will contain some analysis videos on poems and hopefully books if I have the time to do this, and so I'll start slowly uploading them. This is for 2022, aka for this year's syllabus, and hopefully these videos will help both of us do great on our exams. Today, let's start with the first poem from the Holy List, Love in a Life by Robert Browning. Let's start AO3, which is showing understanding of the context of the poem. So Love in a Life was originally published in Men and Women, a collection comprised of 51 poems in 1855. So they weren't hugely popular at the time, mostly because people expected smooth rhyme and smooth rhythm, whereas this poetry collection contained a lot of poems that were asymmetrical and had a lot of discordant words. However, they did slowly start to gain popularity. We're talking about early Victorian verse here, so I think it will be helpful if I give a brief overview of the time. So we had, before the Victorian era, we had Romanticism and post-Romanticism, and whereas in Romanticism we had this idealism and transcendentalism, which is basically, in simple words, just people believing that there's more to the physical world that meets the eye and it's in the mind that we can really... It's a belief that this sense and intuition that a person has is better than logic and reasoning, and idealism follows a similar sort of pathway where it all takes place in the head, and these things are just more important than the actual physical experience. It's basically a spiritual focus on the theoretical elements rather than the practical. This is challenged by people starting to seek empirical evidence more and a firm concept of what is right and wrong. It's something that we still associate with Victorians, this firmness and this strictness, and actually a lot of the iconic figures of the Romanticism era, such as Coleridge, lived to be in the Victorian age. The Victorian period is roughly the years that Queen Victoria ruled, hence the name, and it is often considered the golden age of literature because we just saw this massive increase in all sorts of novels, political novels, religious novels, historical novels, and the main kind of themes and characteristics were class and social mobility, and this viewing of nature as something less idealistic, as something less godly. But during the Victorian times, we also see a growth in verse, and here is where, for example, Robert Browning and Elizabeth Barrett Browning come in. They were married in 1846, so they are known for their love interest and for their poems towards each other. They are one of those famous historical couples. Elizabeth, she suffered from illnesses which were undiagnosed back then and which people still argue over now. So the symptoms were weakness and heart palpitations, other symptoms that made living her life difficult. Some people believe that this was a result of spinal injuries from horse riding and other activities of the time, while others believe that this was perhaps psychosomatic and caused by the inferior position of women in society in Victorian times. She took opium to help with the pain, which doctors say actually contributed to the pain that she felt later in life as a result, because it was a dangerous thing to be taking at such a young age, and also to the vividness in her poetry. So Elizabeth and Robert, they started courting, but Elizabeth believed that her father wouldn't approve the relationship, so the two of them fled to Italy. And the warm, sunny climate of Italy actually helped things for a while, and it helped her health because it was a sharp difference from the cold, rainy Britain atmosphere, but eventually her health did start to decline again, and she died later in her husband's arms. One final thing about the context of the poems: Love in a Life is complementary to Life in a Love, and as a result of the two of them complementing each other, actually the reader has the sense of a third image, in like a third poem in their mind, a sort of continuation of the two. And for me, it seems natural that Love in a Life is like a sadder version of Life in a Love. It's a sort of ending, a sort of resignation where the narrator loses that firmness and that desperation they had in the previous poem, but this is completely open to interpretation and how you see the two poems as being, and that sense of what's unsaid forming from there on. In both, the speaker is searching for his love, but in Love in a Life, it's less frantic, it's less you can't escape. Love in a Life takes place in a house, whereas Life in a Love takes place in something like somewhere out there. Life is completely consumed by love, whereas in Love in a Life, the narrator sort of takes enjoyment, takes pleasure in the process of finding his love, and so the result is a bigger sense of fulfillment. The two poems are often overlooked, which I think is a shame, especially because, first of all, it's fascinating to see exactly how they complement each other, and second of all, they actually show the two types of characters that recur the most in Robert Browning's work, which I think is an important point to mention. With that, let's move on to actually talking about Love in a Life. Pause here to read the poem once more by yourself. I'll start with a very brief overview of the important things and themes and then move on to the line-by-line analysis, which is the longest part in this video. When the poem was published, his wife was still alive, but I think it really contributes to this bittersweet atmosphere. It's almost as if this is his vision looking forward to a time when she is gone. So the reason that it's bittersweet is because he recognizes that he has her now and that he has this time granted to him to enjoy her and to spend time with her and to love her and to have this love in his life, but he also sees what's about to come, and this loneliness permeates the poem. So there's a note of fear and loneliness, but also fun, and the objects that she leaves behind, it's almost like a game to him because it's traces of her, so it's like a homage. By looking for her, by seeing these objects, it's a way to honor her memory, because he sees the perfume and he recognizes that he knows what her perfume is like. So all these little traces of her as a person, all these little characteristics, he sees them and he gets a chance to remember that he knows what she's like, that he knows her closely, that they both love each other. In the poem, the narrator is searching for his wife throughout the house, and there's just constant sadness and loneliness throughout. At times, the atmosphere is frantic, and for me, this really screams desperation, although I do think there are messages of hope kind of interspersed throughout the poem that make the reader think that perhaps eventually, one day, maybe he will find it, and also show that the narrator isn't completely crushed. It almost seems like the narrator really does know he's not going to find her, but because of the attitude that he holds, this believing and convincing himself that he will find her also makes the experience of reading the poem more bearable. And what doesn't make it bearable is actually the experience of being at the edge of your seat, because it feels infuriating knowing that she's right ahead of you. And I think it's very much how the narrator feels, because every time he walks in, he sees the traces and it almost feels like she's just right there. It's very ambiguous since we do not know what happened to his wife, and I think this is something that you can mention in the personal response, what you think happened to his wife, where she is, if you think he'll ever find her again. And also, another important point is it's never actually said that she's the wife. I just assume it's the wife due to the fact that it's their house, their shared house. And I'm assuming that in Victorian times they would have frowned upon them and said like, "You heathens, how can you live together and not be married?" So I assume it is his wife. The narrator soliloquizes his love. He addresses her as her. He doesn't say personal pronouns. He doesn't say you. And I think it's another way of pointing out that he can't address her because she's not there. And it's just another method that the poem uses to remind the reader that the woman is not there, that he can't address her, and her presence, how her presence is missed in the poem, how there's traces of her but there's no her, how he can address this poem to her but she cannot hear it, and so he does not use the word you. She can't be addressed, but she is very much a part of his life. She is in his life. But unlike life in a love, it's the love within his life. So she's not his entire life, and he has other methods of being. The love is within him, and it's a treasured part of the experience. He almost values having a chance to live life looking for love. It's this experience for him, whereas in life in a love, the love is the main presence, and so he cannot live life without it, and that's why it's so much more frantic. Whereas in love in a life, I feel like at the end of the day, although it's the sense of resignation, even though it turns into a quest, there's also this like sense of continuity, so he can accept that even though he does not find her, his life will go on and it will continue going on, and he has made it his eternal goal to find love in his life. The atmosphere seems cloying at times, but it's also very intimate and very sensual, and as I said before, it's almost a homage to her memory. There's also a sharp contrast between the material and the immaterial. You have her object, but you do not have her, and this juxtaposition, I feel, is a reference to her being dead. If she's in the afterworld, it's her being a material, she's a ghost, whereas she left behind these solid objects in her wake, in the actual presence of our life, because he's on the other side, which could explain why he feels like he cannot reach her even though she's there. So it's almost as if he knows that death is coming, but he just hasn't caught up to it yet because he hasn't died. The themes are separation, passage of time, determination, love, and there's also a few references to mythology and associations that we have with women, particularly like associating the feminine figure with nature. Alright, line by line analysis. Room after room, I hunt the house through, we inhabit together. So the house stretches out eternally. The repetition of the word room, it gives it that sense of continuity and the passage of time, as well as the assonance of the words ooh. It's almost like howling and weeping, but it's also almost like the echo of the heart beating, and it's this call and response sort of situation. Hunt is a reference to nature, which is also symbolical with like a pleasuresome activity, because at the time hunt was something that you did for entertainment. It's an aspirant H, which is just an alliteration of H sounds, and it's almost a guttural sound. I think it really shows how tired he is of the journey, how he's like panting, he's going like I just can't search for her anymore, and yet he still continues. But even with Hunt being something pleasuresome, it's still very bloodthirsty. It's a step away from the word look. He cannot look no longer for his wife because it's just this eternal desperation. And yes, he's so tired, he knows he's going to have to continue searching, but still he does it. And so it's not so much looking anymore as much as hunting, that desperate dive to get some food, because she's like his sustenance. The love is his sustenance. The three lines do not rhyme. Yeah, so it sounds harsh and it sounds almost like a story. The we inhabit together, I think, is particularly pointed, and it also shows that he still thinks of her as in the present tense, so it's hard for him to let her go. The lines jam without pause, which could also show how the narrator just cannot stop, how he doesn't stop until he absolutely must, when the darkness of the twilight comes on. And heart, fear nothing, for heart thou shalt find her, next time herself, not the trouble behind her, left in the curtain the couch's perfume. So he reassures himself and his heart and the reader that yes, of course you will find her, there is no other possibility. Shalt is also a modal verb, which are usually used to indicate a sense of surety, so he uses those modal verbs to reassure himself, the heart, us, the reader, that yes, of course, she will be there eventually. The heart is addressed. Notice how she isn't addressed personally, but the heart uses heart, fear nothing, for heart thou shalt find her. So the heart is addressed as you. It's personified. It's almost like a separate living being, which also makes sense because he's quite literally reliant on it to live. It's within him. It's love within a life. Trouble, I think, can have two meanings. So it's both the difficulty that he has in finding her and also the difficulty in relationships, those like struggle of knowing you love someone so much and the little arguments that you have occasionally, how they break you. And I think trouble can also be disturbances. So the wakes she leaves in her path, like the little perfume in the couch, which I think shows her being the breath of the house, and she's literally all over the furniture. She's just so present in the house, so no matter where he looks, because he lives here, he just can't help but see her everywhere. There are a lot of caesuras in the form of commas in the first line, and the heart is also isolated between hyphens and full stops, and this fractured state shows how uncertain he is in his life and how he's supposed to just carry on existing. It shows this uncertainty that he feels, almost as if he needs to pause and really ask himself, how do you go on living life without that love? That's a critical element of your life. The sense of uncertainty is also there in her being less certain and stressed than the other words. I mean, her as in the word her. So like, next time herself, not the trouble behind her. Trouble is far more accented than her, suggesting a sense of uncertainty that contrasts with the surety of the modal verb. So it's like he is uncertain about her and the possibility of finding her, but he is sure that he needs to reassure himself, and it's just this accent in the two of them. As she brushed at the cornice wreath, blossomed anew, yon looking glass gleamed at the wave of her feather. So there's sibilance in the soft S sounds, which for me also evokes the image of time passing, which is a critical theme in the entire poem. So in an hourglass, when the sand sifts and it's like the soft sound, it's also very suitable to describing the action as brushing, a very light touch. It's very like slithery in a way, and these lines have a sense of sort of kinesthesia where the memories just hit him when he sees her, when he just imagines her touching the object. In the line, the corniest trees blossomed anew, I also saw a potential reference to Persephone, as in she touches the flowers and they grow again. And the idea of the wreath too. So a wreath is just like a circular bouquet, so it's technically a whole, but it's made to not just be a whole, it's made to be a beautiful thing with flowers, something that you can hang up. And I think it could also be a reference to giving birth, because this whole replacing old flowers with new flowers, growing flowers from nothing, it's that kind of imagery that is evoked for me, at least. I'm assuming she fixed the flowers, or she just replaced them or rearranged them or something, but in the event that this is a construction wreath, so she could wipe the dust off it, and she can make it young and glittery and shiny again. Also, how the looking glass, which is basically a mirror, gleamed and shone just at the wave of her feather. It's again a potential reference to birds. This could be the dusting thing again, as in just you dust it with the feather thing. But what you can see is she has so much command over the room. The room is physically dependent on her presence. She doesn't need an entire wing. She can just use a feather and suddenly everything will be whole and new again. And I think this image of associating her with a bird, for me at least, birds symbolize liberty as they fly in the skies, and humans can never fully reach them, only with a plane. We can't just naturally fly and be with them. And so again, it's the sense of being just out of reach. On to stanza 2. The two stanzas are mirrored, so the first 3 lines are short and the final 5 are longer. Actually, what's interesting to note is I think the word stanza actually comes from the Italian for little room, and the 2 stanzas explore different wings of the house. So it's like the first stanza is one wing and the second stanza is another wing, and so since there's 2 wings, again we have this bird related imagery. The difference in the third short line and in the first long line is it creates this sense of abrupt unfolding, almost as if when he finds one thing, it just rolls on and on and on, and suddenly there's way more things to find. And so the narrator engages and tries to catch up, and the line just keeps getting longer, and it's, in my mind, it's this vivid imagery of a person just running short at first and then starting to go faster and faster, but still he just can't seem to reach her. So okay, full disclosure, I am very bad at rhythm. I cannot help with the rhythm, but I can say that the majority of the poem is written in iambic meter, which we associate typically with love because of Shakespeare's sonnets. And I think it can also be him being frantic, the spacing of a room, because iambic is like stress and stress, stressed and stress, like that kind of thing. I think it's an allusion to how the narrator is pacing and running, and also the frantic beating of his heart, which can just not be regular because he knows that he cannot rest until he finds her. Yet the day wears, and door succeeds door. I tried the fresh fortune, ranged the white house from the wing to the center. Still the same chance, she goes out as I enter. Now him finding her is in the hands of the fates, and it's already getting darker, and it's already like he can't see the light, and he can't see the prospect of finding her, but still he has this separate sense of hope that maybe something will interfere and by chance he'll find her. Also, what I think is notable is now everything takes a twist for the darker side, as well as literally becoming darker, aka the light fading. I think there's also the reader losing a little bit of trust in the narrator. It seems like the narrator is unreliable, because how can it be that the house, no matter how much he passes through, it just gets longer? It seems as if the house is undergoing a spatial transformation. It expands and expands, so he just never gets to her. And it's not so much a game anymore. It's not so much fun, because it seems like no matter what clue he uncovers, life just keeps on moving and he just can't get to her, and time passes and he knows that he's running out of time to find her, and he's running out of time to have the possibility of finding her in the light, and also perhaps metaphorically as in his life running out. I think you can also visibly see the pent-up emotions, because I would be frustrated too. They're almost like 2 ships that are just ahead of each other. My whole day in the quest, who cares? But 'tis twilight you see, with such suits to explore, such closets to search, such alcoves to importune. The speaker enters the twilight, which is quite literally a gray zone, and the light is murky, as in the light being both his hope and the light illuminating her, and it turns into obsession. The house shifts accordingly. The phrase, who cares? Again, he's trying to convince himself and accept that it's time to rest, but he cannot be fully happy. Already he's looking into the next day. He knows that he's doomed to spend the rest of his life looking for her eternally. He already thinks that he will spend the next day exactly like this one, and they all just blur into the distance. And suddenly the word hunt turns into quest. Spent my whole day in the quest. So whereas before it was a hunt and a pleasuresome activity, a quest is a very long journey for something that's worth it, something that's typically greater than you, like a quest for relics and precious objects. The rooms turn into suites, closets, and alcoves. This adds to the difficulty of finding it, because they're not just rooms anymore. They split into 3 different categories, and the house just keeps expanding. It reminds him of the quest ahead, and perhaps also because of the nature and the difficulty of the quest and the house always expanding. I think you can think of it as an Escher painting. Not sure if I pronounced that correctly, but you know those paintings that have houses and stairs in impossible places? And that terrifying illusion, because it seems normal until you look into it and you realize that you just can't get from one place to another. I think as another personal response, you could also mention if you think that the quest will ultimately be successful, or if the quest will end in his own death and he's just looking for her in vain. So I know that was very brief, hopefully a reminder of things you already knew and a good study guide. If it was helpful, please leave a like and a comment, and do consider subscribing so you don't miss new videos. Thank you so much for watching, and we can do it. See you next week.